So then we are back with more understanding from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Itzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. Then we find a layer of understanding of the 61st chapter, where then we read the spring feast and also the mentioning of the autumn feast and the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Those are then the cities returning, and then the first holy city on the land of Cush. As we understand, then there is a section of the holy instruction where you find then areas of measurement versus then the measuring stick. So then let's understand what this means. Very interestingly, the holy instructions then indicates then the people of the Messiah obviously in the future would make measurements of then the land where then tabernacling would be taking place. So it's very interesting because Ezekiel and also Daniel, both of them, they make references of this episode. However, you find then the measuring of the future holy government city versus then the delineation of the area of the holy cities in this age. For those people interested in learning the holy instructions, it's very important making a delineation of what those mean. Because then when people, they realize must never be a third temple, then they understand the measuring stick is related with the measurement of the government yet coming, versus then the delineation of the land where tabernacling is then set up. Very interesting, because Yehuda, when you read it, you understand people were there. Many of their circumstances related with also Gentiles, but they were underway, so then they would form another holy city. Very interesting. So then, based from the understanding of tabernacling and the importance of knowing of what then the Messiah has for the near future, it's very imperative understanding then the Gentile level, so then people are not then caught unawares. As far as the authorities of these countries, they can't be compared with the holy cities. The reason why, it's because there is only a Creator, and He is holy, and He has His own government. So let's understand from a person where then awaits for the completion of the autumn feast per instructions, and then must set up his own government yet. So then, if you are a person then waiting for over 7,000 years to get a plan straightened out, wouldn't you be a bit concerned with the time of the end? As then the instructions, they say these age or then the life of this moment was then bound and then making the wrong usage out of it. So unfortunately this age was bound in stupidity, where then this world should have an understanding of the evils involved, and then when they refuse, understand, and submit tabernacling, they can understand how devastating their evils are related with this creation. The creation then was subjected to futility. What is futility? Governments not understanding tabernacling. It's absolutely futile. What can we understand then from our nation? There was an old saying from many years ago A person very wisely said, we Americans, we can adapt to any situation as long as we are told the truth. So then let's evaluate this wise saying, because when we know the truth, then we should adapt. So then we are not caught in the midst of a predicament. So let's evaluate the birth of our country over a couple hundred years ago and understand then the age where this nation then was, in quote, born. We were born then during the time of the 1,000 years of the deceit. When did it start? Started then in 1009. If you do a very thorough study, you find then the Muslims, they went to the holy city and they destroyed the holy city. As we understand, Jerusalem was then destroyed many times. But this time, for the first time, then the tomb was destroyed. So the turning point of the 1,000 years was then because of the tomb for the first time then destroyed. Then the holy cities were no more. So when you read the 61st chapter, then you begin your layering, as if you would eat, for instance, pancakes in the morning. When you are very hungry, you get up in the morning and you want some 10 pancakes. So you begin to layer those understandings. So where do you get then the structure of these layerings? You get from the holy mikras, the holy rehearsals. Where do you find it? In Leviticus. But you are not going to be concerned with the feasts themselves. But what you want is then the shadow prophetic events based from this structure. So when you understand then in Hebrews the instructions, they have then these shadow prophetic events related with the times and the seasons. So when you read the instructions or then the holy manuscripts, you have then the holy instructions, then you have the prophets always pointing people back to the instructions, and then you have history, you have chronicles in a chronological order of the events. Then you find the writings related with it, the wisdom of Shimon, for instance, but never mixed with the holy instructions if you understand precisely what it means. Those were extras. So you have the bulk from Bereshit to Devarim, or then Genesis to Deuteronomy. Those are the instructions, those are the bases, those are then the foundations. Then the rest of it you find the prophets were then given extras related with the instructions. Then you find the writings, the history, until the completion of the spring feast. So there are no Gospels. Gospel is a foreign word. Doesn't exist. If you try to study the holy manuscripts, you find doesn't exist. Because so many people, they think the Messiah has changed his identity from the Hebraic lineage and then to the worldly lineage, as if then the world was no longer condemned. So try to understand how putrid this understanding is. People truly believe there is a Messiah, understandable, but then he changed his character from his lineage, where then the whole instructions they are based, and then he became from the world. So rather than set up tabernacling as it was, then the Messiah is wandering in the world. As if then when you read the Messiah then was sent because God so loved this world that he sent his son, and then the whole planet became tabernacling. You know what this means? Stupidity. the Messiah was sent so the tabernacling of the desert would continue, as it was per the instructions of Moses, as it was instructed in 23rd chapter of the first recorder of the spring feast, in maintaining what it was then in the desert. And as then his people would then gather themselves and starting up holy cities, then the Gentiles would be linked up in the spirit with the holy cities. That's how we get saved. The world is condemned. So when you read the scripture from the Greco and the Romans, where they invented their own Savior, as they thought, oh, the Messiah then, he was a person that then went to the Gentiles. The Messiah, firstly, he did not go to the Gentiles. He first went out and he told his people, rescue those decent people that went out of Israel, because Israel at the time of the completion of the spring feast was contaminated with the paganism and politics. And the Messiah said, go then first and restore your own. Make sure then they start holy cities. So he said then, the authority was given to me in the heaven and the earth. Go therefore around the world and form holy cities, as per the instructions of Moses. But then there are some updates where you find in Hebrews 7:12, who wrote Hebrews? Yohanan. Because roughly there was 100 years of transition from the first and second tabernacle services, and you find Yohanan in the first holy city, and he was in the mainland. He was sent to the isle of Patmos later. And from the island he never wrote. So then after Yohanan, then started the relationship with the holy cities of the Messiah and Gentiles. Then the Messiah had taken place of the Holy of Holies, as per the instructions of Moses. So then from this understanding, what can you understand? There were many arks of the covenant. There were many menorahs. They had to make replicas of those. And there were then many holy cities around for 1,000 years. Thus you understand when you read Galah or Revelation, then the Messiah in 1,000 years of his reign, then you understand. He was born as the king until 1009, the holy cities were around. And then precisely per the physical understanding of the holy cities, from roughly 100 until 1009. Those are the times where then the cities were around. Then afterwards, 1,000 years of deceit. That's where you get your church. Where the Greco and the Romans, they came together and they stole the documents of the Hebrews from the holy cities, and they scandalized the scripture for their own gain. Why? Because the kingdoms around, they were not receiving taxes. So then when those Greco and the Romans, they were translating, what did they do? For instance, in Romans, they said, then you should be obedient to your government. Should you be obedient to your government? What was the meaning from the Israelic lineage or from the Hebrew? We should be obedient of the government of the kingdom to come government. These means they set apart in their holy cities and then functioning with the 7 spirits of Elohim, 7 functions. There are no gifts of the Spirit. So then from then on was the entire world caught up in this false Messiah. That's why then Shaliach Shaul mentioned 2 Corinthians 11:4. If any person comes to you and teaches you this crazy Messiah, another spirit outside of tabernacling, then you are crazy. You have the wrong Messiah. This is what Shaliach Shaul said. That's why the world is going through lots of transitions, because the holy cities are returning. This age is preparing for the autumn feast. Only half of the instructions, half of the prophets were completed. The other half must yet be completed. So then where do you get your 1,000 years as a day and a day as 1,000 years? Where does it come from? You have to understand, the Messiah spent a couple of Yom days, Yom creation days, while he was completing the spring feast. But then if you're a person not interested in the holy language, you are not interested in the holy mikras, you are not interested in the holy feasts, you don't care about the old Hebrew practices, how are you going to understand the instructions? Then you find yourself believing any kind of a junk and expecting, because you are doing the best you can, then at the end you are going to be saved. You must be joking yourself. This was the lie concocted by the Greco and the Romans. What we do understand is when we read Metitiahu, or the first recorder of the spring feast, you find the 23rd chapter, the Messiah is speaking with the people of the law and his own people, and also the scribes. Whatsoever Moses told you to do and observe, these do and observe. But don't do as they do, because they included takanot and masim in the midst of the instructions, and the Messiah would not do what the people of the law want him to do. Because later when he was taken over then the Holy of Holies, then the instructions must then remain intact. So then, as we know the truth, then we must make proper adjustments. As Americans said of Americans themselves, we can deal with the truth as long as we know what the truth is. Now comes then a factor of the Gentile level. The Gentile level is then what the Messiah spent with the Samaritans, 2 Yom creation days. Those were then the understandings of the time of the Creator himself, completing then the spring feast. Where do you find the spring feast? The substance or the feast itself you find from Leviticus the 23rd chapter, from the 1st verse until the 21st verse. The Messiah came and the instructions were then completed, and the Creator himself was doing through his Son. It was a facet of the Son, but then when the instructions were completed, then the Creator himself was in the Messiah. When the Messiah was casual, then was the Messiah himself. So then, after these, you find in the 22nd verse of the 23rd chapter of the Leviticus, then you find the time of the Gentiles. That's why you read Ruth. The layer of understanding, remind yourself of the pancakes. Then Ruth is then the understanding of the Gentiles, and then it would cut the corners of the field, meaning then the Gentiles would be granted then also salvation. And then you find from the 23rd chapter, from the 23rd verse until the 44th, you find autumn feast, or then vengeance. That's why we are preparing ourselves for these vengeance. So the question is, when was the Savior born? He was born in 4999. How do we know this? We understand then the counting of the months. Every lunar view of every month from the land of Israel counts the time of the starting of the month. When the barley is Aviv, then in the land of Israel, starting of the year. And then you have the lunar eclipses of the time. You have the recording of the star that showed up in heaven recorded. It was an astronomical recording. There are references of the census of the time and the standard understanding of the holy mikras. Every year, then, they would do precisely the same holy rehearsals. The computer was able to record this information, and then was detected 49.99. Some people, they say 39.99 if you start then the creation with 0. But in Hebrew, when you are born, you are already a year old. So the counting of the 7,000, truly we are then over the 7,000. But if you start with 0, then you have to understand, then it's 6,000 and over 6,000. So make it easier, and per the lineage of the Hebrew, 7,000 and over. 49.99, first day of the feast of Sukkah, tabernacles. Thus he tabernacled. It was a period of time of the year where there was then the rehearsal or the feast of tabernacles. Don't you read then he came in tabernacle with us? Is that inhabiting with the world? No, it's tabernacling. The world is condemned. He came to save his people and also the Gentiles via an understanding of tabernacling started in the desert. It must remain intact. If you are a person, because the laws were abolished, you are stupid. You don't understand what you're talking about. You can say the instructions were abolished because only half of it was completed. And when you read it then in Hebrews, there was then a change of the instructions, but it's not a change, it's a completion. In English is very bad because it gives you the understanding of change as replacement rather than completion. That's why then in the 23rd chapter of the first recording of the spring feast, you'll find whatsoever Moses told you to do and observe, maintain it. Completion of the first, starting of the second, with updates of Hebrews 7:12. Then for 1,000 years after Yohanan gives you the starting of the holy cities. The 1,000 years truly started when the Messiah was born. He was born as the king. But then tabernacling truly of the second tabernacle services started during the time of Yohanan until 1009. Then after 1009 came deceit. Churches don't exist. It's made it up. Doesn't exist the Savior of them as they think, he came to save this world. This world is condemned. Don't we understand from the instructions? As the Messiah spoke then as it was during the time of Noah. People were given to relationships and they were doing the mundane and making fun out of it. Came the Vesuvius and then they were destroyed. Then the same way during the time of Lot. And then came fire from heaven or hail. So when you read hail in Revelation, does it mean ice coming from heaven as a storm? No, it's a hell fire, meaning brimstone. That's how the world is going to end, with a shower of sulfur. Some people, when they read Revelation, all they think is ice. Hail, as a storm. So the main day situations, when the time comes, then people are not prepared, then they're going to be destroyed. So then when the 1009 then started, then deceit, that's where you get your church from. That's why the damn thing never works. It's always junk. So what do we understand of this period of 1,000 years? Then you have to remind yourself of the pancakes. Daniel the prophet then explained as far as tabernacling, then the set apart would get mixed with the world for some time. The holy lineage would mix up itself with the world. And then later they would resume their services. Thus then he said, people would go to and fro, the 12th chapter of Daniel. And then at the end of the deceit, knowledge would increase for the purposes of trade. So then you layer then Ezekiel at the same time, the restoration of the two sticks. A stick of Ishmael and a stick of Yitzhak. Those must be restored. So the first holy city, then it is obviously restored, then the stick of Yitzhak. And then they are granted with a second anointing. So what is the purpose of the second anointing? So then Israel, the nation of Israel, then can be pruned. That's when you read then Zechariah. And then 10 Gentiles would come around the Hebrew person and try to grab by the garment and say, please teach us, because we know the Creator is with you. But they are not going to teach anybody, because they have a set objective of only restoring Israel. Then the testifiers of the Messiah, what you are hearing this very moment, these are testifying of the Messiah. Those are done by the Gentiles, enlightened by the Messiah. Those are the work of those Gentiles saved, testifying on behalf of the Messiah. The set apart in their holy cities, they have an objective of restoring Israel. Thus, at the very end, then Israel is restored. But first, the holy cities must return. Then comes the set apart, going to Jerusalem, and then obviously reteaching them. And those people who are being saved, Gentiles in the Messiah, those then at some point, they gala the other people, or they are then revealing the plan for other people, but they don't function. They only testify. So then, at this point, then we understand the stick of Yitzhak then is restored, and then comes the stick of Ishmael. 62nd chapter of Yeshayahu the prophet gives you the Ishmaelites. You have to read from the proper understanding, because the Israelites, unfortunately, they changed the instructions used in their Takanot Masim. When you read it in turban and the golden turban, Hebrews, they don't use turbans. What is the proof of it? Well, Ronald found then the chamber where the holy objects were found in 82, and he did not find the garments, because they are not relevant. The situation of stones and these stone, that stone, and 12 stones of the 12 tribes, those were invented. Because the Ishmaelites, they were so prominent during the time, and the second son was absolutely envious. So they made it up. This stone is for this tribe, and this stone for this tribe. Then you have the ephod, and this and that and the other. It doesn't exist. How do we know it doesn't exist? The Messiah, he used the garment of a priest. He was the high priest. What did he use? A standard piece of cloth with no seam, leather sandals. He didn't order for, the garment not be flap around. He would have a belt around his waist, as the prophet Eliyahu had. This was then the garment of the priest. Did they use turban? No, they used a veil in front of their faces. That's why you have the veil in the Holy of Holies separating it. So when the holy Hebrews would pray They placed then the veil in front of their faces, indicating what they must observe once a year when the high priest would go in the Holy of Holies. There was no turban. So the 62nd chapter, it relates then with the Ishmaelites. Then you find during the time of the restoration period where we are at, after 2009, until the starting of the autumn feast, then is the time of the restoration also of the authority of the Ishmaelites. That's why you have the most content of petroleum in this planet located in Arabia. That's where the Ishmaelites are at. First son of Ibrahim. So how then is the world is going to be so transitioning itself where then the Ishmaelites must receive then the authority of trade? There is only an answer only. Parcels. Freight. And what do you understand of freight from Daniel? Freight from Daniel, understand then at the end of the 1,000 years of the seat would have a peak of knowledge. And Daniel was a tradesperson, mostly. Some say, oh, prophet. Understandable, he did understand tabernacling. But if you write down the mentionings of tabernacling versus then trade as a tradesperson or a politician, you find more than 90% he was a politician of the Gentile level, indicating the trade of the end. He was a tradesperson. Then you find the Messiah speaking in Galah or Revelation and the freighters of the earth. What can you understand? As far as the Gentile level, what is the country then with the most technology as far as freighting is concerned? China. So you must understand the level of the Gentiles is coming then, the system of the Chinese providing jobs for thousands of people, where they do direct trade via computer, thus generating a lot of freighting, a lot of volume of freight. How is it going to take place? Very understandably, we've got then mentionings of IMF. You have then even the Prime Minister of Israel some time ago stating then this printing out money festival would not last more than 5 years. This was 2 years ago. We are not taxing as we should have. And then you find the Chinese already very prominent in the Pacific. So then we've entered the time of the Bell and the Dragon. Why do we read then the Apocrypha of Bell and Dragon? Dragon is the Chinese system. It's a system of precision. So when you read Galah, the 20th chapter, the 1,000 years of the seat, you read devil. In the 20th chapter, when you read the many facets of Nahashatan, you find then serpent, you find devil, you find then dragon. And some people, they think they are the same. They are not the same. During the 1,000 years of the seat, from 1009 to 2009, it was the devilish time. Time of deceit. Then after 2009, we've entered the time of the dragon. It's precision. That's why you have then the peak of knowledge for the purposes of trade. So China must have its way. So where do we find our nation at the moment? After the visit a couple of months ago in China, many nations decided to go against China. You find the United States joining up with Japan. You find them joining up with Australia. You find Australia buying aircrafts. They have a lot of 100 aircraft to be purchased. Then you find also 12 submarines. Then you find Indonesia trying to protect itself by upgrading their military. So you find then the Balian or the Babylonian system. Why Babylonian system? Because the mixing of the set apart with the world for a time, spoken of by Daniel, those are related with 1,000 years of deceit. Where then the nations, because of this mixing, they want to maintain the same system, what they think God is and Savior is. It's a God of their own. It's a Messiah of their very own. So this Babylonian system is trying to take over then the dragon system of China. And we understand it's not going to work. So what do we find then? We find our president at this moment in Central America trying to establish a military base in Panama, because the new Panama Canal then is going to be open next year. We find our government ridiculously at no aim. We find the police force unfortunately involved in ridiculous plans. Because when the government does not have any aim, then the rest of the police force, FBI, yes, CIA, the whole 9 yards, they become ridiculous. It is understandable they have a job to do. They must enforce the law, but the very law itself, the very top, has no aim. What is going to be of our economy in the next 36 months? We've gathered information from IMF 2 years ago would not last more than 5 years. Then you find the Prime Minister of Israel spoken of the same situation. Then you find, a day or so ago, you find then even the economy of the Northern Kingdom, the very people of the economy over there, explaining that they must then taking very strong measures the next 36 months to 5 years. So each of these understandings should give us an alarming red flag where we should then line up our economy, line up our taxation and freighting at the same time. Because from the Gentile level we find then at some point the stick of authority of freight, of then trade, must be restored back to the Ishmaelites. Thus Ezekiel the 37th chapter. Remind yourself of the pancakes. So then rather than our president visiting with other countries, making sure then they come up with a plan of restoration, then he's trying to establish military bases. Thus you understand then Baal and the dragon. When you read Baal and the dragon in the Apocrypha, the extra writings of Daniel, then you understand that spiritual understanding of the time of deceit, where the set apart had mixed themselves up with the rest of the world, and then the rest of the world from this point they want to maintain this scandalization. But Daniel said it's only for a time. Then the set apart must resume the holy services. So as far as this church is concerned, they have only an option, and an option only. They only talk regarding work ethics. There is nothing else the church can do. So then, we find our president traveling around then in Central America, trying to mesmerize the people over there and trying to come up with some sort of a solution of a containment of then the Chinese trade. The problem is we don't understand the Creator Himself has generated this system so then the world can be provided with jobs. There are thousands of people from many nations complaining because the governments are then very enslaving the people. They don't understand. They don't know how to govern. And then we find United States, unfortunately, leading then Japan, leading then Australia, and trying to come up with a military base then in New Zealand, preventing then New Zealand from becoming then the South Pacific trading post. Then you find our president going to Panama, where then President Carter many decades ago gave back to the people of Panama then the Panama Canal. Then you find him over there, walking around trying to establish then a military base over there. We are not stupid. We understand what's going on. Then this Eric Holder guy going to New Zealand, all because, trying to find some sort of a cyber partnership of security related with the computer, the same agenda as the president has. And both they want military bases in both places. But then when we understand Daniel the 11th chapter, remind yourself first of the pancake. The 11th chapter deals with exclusive understanding of the time of the restoration period, meaning from 2009, prior of the starting of the autumn feast. Though we understand the statue of the second chapter is the base of the statue where iron does not mix with the clay. Understandably, after the Roman Empire dismantled itself, started then the iron and clay. We understand. However, there is a further refinement of these, where then Daniel explained during the time of the restoration period, where then iron would be only the first Chinese, second Soviet Union or the Northern Kingdom, and Africa is the third kingdom yet birthing. The rest is clay. Does not mean incompetent, does not mean not having economical power. It simply means as a reference, so then we can understand instructions. These are the main thinkers, the main kingdoms making decisions for a time. So then when these kingdoms, they are then together, and they are from the BRICS, as we understand, it's a initiation of the system of the Chinese, where then it later becomes then available for other people. But then remind yourself of the layers of pancakes. These must work together in harmony. Would be similar as if you would have then your computer monitor, the flat monitor. You place a flat monitor on one on top of the other. Then a computer monitor is related with the 11th chapter. A computer monitor relates with the second chapter. A computer monitor relates with the 37th chapter of Ezekiel. And then another on top of the other related with Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. So at a glance, when you angle it, you have each of those in a specific understanding at the same time and the same point. Welcome to the real understanding of the instructions. So then we find ourselves during this time understanding then these layers per the instructions, where then you find the kingdom of the East China, kingdom of the North Soviet Union. Why Soviet Union? Because the Soviet Union is returning. As we understand, a couple of days ago, there was then a tradition of the Soviet Union then returned. Why are they going to return? Because they are then the filtering system of the Babylonian system. Trade must not mix with the religious or religion of the Babylonian system. The dragon is China. China must be absolutely separated from Babylonian trading system. Because we find then unwisely this country of ours going around the world trying to form military bases in New Zealand with the pretense of security, cyber, computer partnership. Then the president, precisely the same agenda, going to Panama and trying to control the Panama Canal. Both of them knuckleheads because they don't understand instructions. And then you find when the Chinese then obviously had enough with it, then they hired the Northern Kingdom as then the filtering system of trade. You want to do trade with China, you have to go through the Northern Kingdom. Then you have to understand, no more BS up there. Not only this, but then China obviously hiring the Northern Kingdom as their managers. Then these managers, they also have the luxury of power of the military. So then let's combine the Chinese military with the Northern Kingdom or the Soviet Union. So then both militaries at the hand of Mr. Putin. You can be sure of it 100%. We would be coming out of the countries very fast. So how do we explain these areas where our military gets involved, the police force gets involved, CIA gets involved, FBI gets involved, and each of them act as they were absolutely scoundrels? Because they don't understand the flow of understanding of the worldwide transitional. And if there is a country in this world or a kingdom where we should never play with, is the Northern Kingdom. That's a place of the world we do not want to play with. During the time of the Cuban crisis, unknown to many people, the Soviets, they had nuclear torpedoes. You know, JFK over there, the situation over there in Cuba got so tense and the ships had turned around. During this time, the Soviets, they were under the water with the nuclear torpedoes. If they would release one of those torpedoes at the shore, it would be disastrous. And they had several of them. Not only one of them, but they have multiple of those nuclear torpedoes. Now you combine then areas not even we knew these in the past. Then you combine with the discipline of the Chinese military in the hands of Mr. Putin. USA and everybody else would coming out of those countries very fast, from you name it, from Windows, from everywhere. We would be returning home real fast and rebuild, and then having our economy lined up and becoming partners later with the Chinese system, while we have time yet during these 36 months. Because what it takes from the Chinese is simple downloading your computer and doing direct trade with the Bank of China. Do you understand eBay? eBay and PayPal. Both places the government can nose around. Then you find the investments of the Chinese being available via computer. So how much more knuckleheads our government can be? So then, since a few days ago, then this Soviet tradition was reinstated. What can we understand of the future? Because the unification of the Kingdom of the East and North obviously must have a diplomatic understandings, being inviting and so on and so forth. But there is no more BS. What can we expect militarily speaking? What can we expect? We can expect a mini Cold War. Put your heads to work. We can expect more patrols, and when the relationship becomes then solidified, and then the Northern Kingdom becomes their managers, you're not going to find then only Soviet submarines. You are going to find Chinese submarines with Soviet captains. So you think you are then monitoring a Chinese submarine. There is no crew over there Chinese. They're going to be throughout the world. So whosoever is doing trade with China is then protected. So try to understand where we are going with this. Each country deciding to do trade with China are instantly protected by their military. So let's watch the United States and Australia and Japan, for instance. Knuckleheads. They are simply knuckleheads. Or coconut heads. They're trying to come together with some sort of a plan, printing out more money, cash in the future, and buying aircrafts and buying more submarines and such. For what reason? We've got 36 months to line up our taxation with freighting. Does the Department of Taxation and Freighting, so then when the volume of parcels they are increased, then our government at least is covered with taxes. Now, rather than doing what's obvious, then you find the president, going around the world and trying to go over there in Central America. Then you find Holder over there going to New Zealand with some sort of a cyber computer, junkie, security crap of some sort. Is that going to work? It's not going to work. We are ruining our economy further. Japan is bankrupt, but they are printing out more money. They got an excitement of the United States, printing out more money, printing out more money, printing out more money. Now Australia got in the midst of it. Not sure what the lady Julia over there went to China, and I don't know what kind of a fear she has, because she wants to order 100 aircrafts, plus then 12 submarines. The question is, can she beat the quantity of military of China and the Soviet Union? Not in 1,000 years. So why is she going to spend so much money and cash in their future, where they worked so diligently thus far, where then each country doing trade with China, they are protected? And if there is a country in this world that we, United States, we do not want to play with, is with the Soviet Union. It is very dangerous. We play around, for instance, with other countries, and play around with Iraq, play around with Iran. In Afghanistan, those people can barely read and write. We walk over them and do whatever we want, but not with the Soviets. If international waters are then being disputed and we try to be big shots over there, we are going to get torpedoed. So let's try to understand and make sure we evaluate our plans of the future, because we are dealing with a very dangerous time. If we were talking regarding only a nation of China, then a nation of the Northern Kingdom, then it would be understandable. But combining them both then is absolutely deadly. And there was an admiral during the time of Pearl Harbor. He said, a smart enemy hits you where you are safe the most. So then we find our president, going over there and Panama and trying to mesmerize the people over there. Understandably, Central America and South America, they hate Americans. They dislike Americans. Don't ask me why, but they don't like. Their view of Americans, they are very prideful, stuck up, big shots. They are not humble, always knowing every time, even when they don't know. America is disliked in Central America and South America. And we think we are going to put up a base over there in Panama because next year the new Panama Canal is going to be open. And do you think the New Zealanders are going to let our bases over there? No, they won't. So let's make sure then our forces don't become then ridiculous. Last year we should have retrieved and worked on our economy. We didn't do it. We are ruining ourselves further. And then the very area where we think we are safest the most, it is the very point where we are going to ruin ourselves. Because we think our military is so powerful and so potent, then when the combination comes, then we get emptied as then a person caught with no understanding whatsoever. And then a person asks, why have we done this for? You know what it's going to be like in America in the next 36 months? There is a word for it. Stupid. And if you get angry when you hear this, not only you are then stupid, but also prideful. The old saying was, if we know the truth, then we can deal with it. Can we deal with it, really? Or are we going to end up being stupid at the end? That's where you're heading towards. You find the government building Ozarks, underground area, underground houses, farming, and so on and so forth for the government. What about the people? FEMA camps for non-legals? And then the admiral saying during the time of Pearl Harbor, very wise words. A smart enemy hits you where you think you are safest the most. So because we think we are big shots going around the world, do whatever you want, in the very situation of the military, that's where we are going to get hit the most. Because when we observe coming from the horizon, then multiple thousands of Chinese ships, along with the Soviets at the same time, believe you are going to understand why we must get out of there real fast. Because we should have returned last year and then rebuild our economy. Be patriotic, but don't be stupid. We can't match the Chinese and the Soviet Union combined. So then this country thought we were always godly. We always have some sort of God, some sort of a savior. We know the truth. Are we going to humble ourselves before the true creator of the heavens and the earth and let China run its course and trust the judgment of the creator? He can maintain this planet intact. Are we truly humble? Do we truly understand the creator as we spoke of so many times in the past? Do we have a sense of God, salvation? Well, let's put to the test. The next 36 months, if we truly believe there is a creator, and there is, we should retrieve and rebuild our economy. Because when the time comes, and then the Chinese and the Soviets are doing patrols, we are going to be bombarded. We are no longer during the time of deceit where America did whatever they wanted. There is a holy schedule at play. Do we want the title of being stupid? Let's run the existing course as it is. The next 36 months, you will understand. America is stupid. Does not mean incompetent. Try to understand. Does not mean uncaring or unkind, but badly managed, becoming then stupid.